say, first of all, thank you to everybody for coming and for taking out some of your busy time to be here with us. We're actually having two seminars, one today. Our aim is to focus very much on policy and practice. And particularly, I think our key question today is about what makes good practice. If we're trying to engage young people in the civic public sphere via the internet, what is good practice? How would we recognise good practice? How do we know it when we see it? How do we make it happen? So what I'm going to do just very briefly is to give you a sense of what the overall project involves. So I'm going to give you a sense of the overall thing. As you can see from that, we're 7 countries. Yes, a 3-year project going through till the summer of 2009. Our basic focus, as we're defining it here, is the potential contribution of the internet to promoting civic participation among young people. We're defining young people as 15 to 25. It's a very arbitrary thing, but what we're doing is just taking that in the absence of anything more definitive. And we're looking within this at civic sites, and I'm putting this term civic in inverted commas because one of the issues is well, actually, how do we define what is civic? Is civic the same as political? Is the civic sphere the same as the public sphere? What do we mean by this? But for the purpose of this project, we're looking at websites produced by government, including across Europe, NGOs, more sort of grassroots activist groups, social networks, communities of people, but also individuals who are putting up sites. And we're trying to look locally, nationally and internationally. Obviously in the European context, one of the big issues is around European citizenship and then potentially the role that new media might play there. So that's our focus. And there are three main strands to this project. Firstly, what we're doing is looking at production. So we're looking at the work of people like those gathered here today. So we're looking at the organisations that produce these websites. We're looking at things like where they get their money from. We're looking at the reasons why they do it in the first place. We're looking at the actual practice. We're looking at how the sites get to be designed and produced, who determines the content that goes on the sites, who moderates the sites and so on. And behind that, we're looking at what the producers assume about young people. There's an attempt here to engage young people. Well, in that process, what are we assuming about who young people are? That's the first bit. The second bit, we're looking at the texts, the actual websites themselves. And we're looking at that partly in terms of content, but also in terms of form. So we're looking at what's actually there, the content of the sites, what the sites are saying, the messages they're conveying. But we're also looking at how the sites are structured, how they're organised, how they're designed. We're looking at different types or genres of sites. And I guess particularly our interest is in the whole issue of participation, or if you like, interactivity. So how are young people being invited to come into these spaces, to engage with each other and to interact and participate. So we have done one big report, which is a kind of survey, a fairly broad-ranging survey of the range of websites across all the 7 partner countries. And we're now in a stage where we're looking at particular case study sites in a lot more detail. And as I say, looking at as much at the form of the sites as the content. And then the third and last bit of this is around the users. So we're looking at how young people use these sites and how they interpret what they find there. So that raises big questions about young people's identity, about how young people define themselves, how they build their identity in relation to media of this kind. And I think it also raises what, in a sense, is perhaps the biggest question of all. How does online participation relate to offline participation? So how does what you do on the internet relate to the kinds of civic participation that you might be engaged in outside? So the online and the offline. And there we've just completed, and we're just in the process of analysing and writing up a fairly big scale survey that we did across the 7 countries. We'll be starting shortly some more qualitative work with young people, talking to young people and getting their perspective on the issues. So we'll be basically doing some focus group discussions there. And just lastly, I think this is the last one, just in terms of thinking about why we're doing it. I mean, obviously for us as academic researchers, there are a whole series of big issues, much debated issues, arguments about social capital, about civic participation. As I said, what is the civic, what counts as participation? And of course, debates about new media, debates about the possibilities of new media as compared with old media, or mediated participation as compared with face-to-face participation. So there are some big issues there for which we hope will inform the work of other researchers taking this forward. We need to be informing policymakers, you know, a sense of how do we bridge the gap to speak to young people and engage young people. So it has implications at that level. And it also has implications for practitioners, for the people who design the sites, but behind them, in a sense, the organisations that are responsible for putting them up, and beyond that also for educators, for youth workers, for people who work directly with young people. And as I said, our key question here is about good practice. What makes for good practice? How do we recognise good practice? So that's kind of why we're doing it. I think the last thing to say is that obviously we're an international group. So one of the things that a project like this does allow to happen is cross-national comparisons. So that's my overview. If you haven't been to the website, then you should do. And at that point, I'm going to cease.